Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, episode number 5. Hey, thanks for coming again and hanging out today. Of course, I always appreciate you coming and listening to this podcast. I'm your host, Kim Lapre from teachersneedteachers.com, which is a coaching and community site for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Now, this is part 3 in a 4-part series about reflecting on your previous school year. In the first episode of this series, we talked about your classroom setup. And then in the last episode, we discussed grading. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about procedures. So all classroom procedures, regardless of the grade that you teach, need to be taught and retaught throughout the year. Students need explicit instruction on your behavior expectations, and without this, they're either going to continually fail to meet those expectations, or they're going to eventually take over the classroom. Now remember, they're not mind readers, and especially because they keep changing teachers, they need to know what you expect, or they're just going to test you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to think about some of the basics for figuring out your classroom procedures. And I want you to think about what has worked this year and what you want to tweak for next year or maybe completely replace. Let's start with how students come into your classroom, where they keep their belongings, and the expectations for the beginning and end of class. So in elementary school, we might line up the students outside and they have to walk in one by one. In middle school or in high school, a lot of times students just walk in and get to their seat. But when they walk to their seat, you're going to have to explain to them exactly what you want them to do. You actually should walk across the room from the door and model what you want them to do. So think back. How did you teach students to come in, or did you even teach them at all? Did you just think, especially in secondary, we take this for granted, did you just expect that they would know what to do as soon as they walked in? Now, where do they keep their belongings? Again, in elementary school, they tend to have some kind of a cubby or a hook to hang up their backpack. Maybe your school has lockers. I know that I haven't seen a locker in a long time in the 16 years that I've been teaching. So students tend to just hang their backpacks on the back of their chairs. Now, I have an expectation where students, they can keep their backpacks on the floor, but it has to be under their seat so that I don't trip over it or it doesn't obstruct any of the walkways. And then when they come to your room, is there something that you have on the board, like a warm-up or a bell ringer? Do they know that they're supposed to start on it immediately? Are they allowed to take out their devices right away? Do you expect them to take out their pens and pencils and maybe their notebook or composition book as soon as they sit down? Be explicit about exactly what you want when they come in, how they come in, and what they do once they sit down. So go ahead and reflect on that. And maybe this year when students walked in, they were kind of crazy and high-fiving each other and they were kind of loud. Now, if you don't want that, then you're going to have to teach it. And chances are you're going to have to reteach it throughout the year, especially when you come back from a major break like winter break. Now, how about at the end of class? When are students allowed to pack up? I know that we like to tell students that the bell doesn't dismiss you. I do. But do you really hold them to that? Or are students slowly zipping up their backpacks, slowly putting things away? Do you catch that? Do those sounds bother you? Is there a penalty if they do start to pack up early? How are you going to teach those expectations next year so that students know? Because those last 5 minutes of class are really crucial. Maybe you're doing an exit ticket. Maybe you have some quick little quiz or prizes that you give out, or you randomly call on people and ask them what they learned that day. Whatever it is, you need to have a routine so that students are accustomed to it. The next thing to consider are your policies for students leaving their seats for whatever reason. It could be to go to the bathroom, to get supplies, sharpen their pencil, blow their nose. if they feel like they have to throw up. These are things that unless you're very specific about what is and isn't allowed, students are just going to default to the previous teacher, or they're just going to try to do whatever they want and see how that works. So if we're going to the bathroom, do they need to raise their hand? Do they need to give you some kind of nonverbal signal? Some teachers give students a certain number of bathroom passes per year, and they have to give it to you and use up one of those bathroom times. When is an appropriate time for them to ask? What if it's an emergency? And then getting supplies. In the previous episode, we talked about having our supplies organized in certain places. And for me, I mentioned how I have supplies in plastic shoeboxes. So what is the protocol for students getting the supplies if they need them? Can they just go up? Do you wait until there's group time, or do you actually give them a chunk of time? You have 30 seconds to grab markers if you need them, or to sharpen your pencil. How do you want them to do this so that there's the least amount of disruption in your class? And the same thing goes for sharpening their pencil. Do you expect them to bring a portable pencil sharpener, or do you have one like an electric pencil sharpener and there's only designated times to do that? Perhaps you want them to have multiple sets of pencils so that if one needs to be sharpened, they can sharpen it later at an appropriate time, but they have a backup so that they're not missing out on their work. Or even blowing their nose. Do they need permission to blow their nose, or can they just go outside and blow their nose? Or can they just get up and grab a tissue? You probably don't want to have them with snot running down their face, or if their nose is bleeding, waiting for you to call on them. So is there a way for them to maybe give you a nonverbal signal that isn't as disruptive so that they can go ahead and do that? Now for me, in terms of bathroom passes, I don't really limit how many times a student can go to the bathroom, but I do have a signal where they sort of like cross their fingers and kind of hold it up and wait for me to acknowledge them. If they ask me to go to the bathroom, I tell them no, because that's not the proper way to ask me. What I prefer is that they hold up the signal in the air, and when I see them, I'll give them a head nod if it's okay for them to go to the bathroom, and then they just get the pass, sign out, and go. This makes it so that while I'm going over instruction or working with a class, I don't have to be stopped when I think that they have a question, but really they just need to use the bathroom. And this makes it so that when it's time to work and get started on something, they're not just waiting until then to go to the bathroom. They can go when they need. How about transitions between activities? This is a big one, especially if you have a longer class period, like a block schedule, and you have 2 hours. A lot of times we switch between activities, or in elementary school when you're transitioning from instruction to recess or lunchtime and back. What kinds of activities or signals or routines, or is there a song that you sing, or do students know exactly what they're supposed to do next? Maybe between activities, like in a secondary classroom, you give them a signal, or you tell them you have 30 seconds to get your books out and a pen and your reading log, and then students know that that's what they're supposed to do, and you have a timer. What do you do so that things transition smoothly and students don't go nuts between, but still have an opportunity for that little brain break that they're probably going to need? In elementary school, when it's time for recess, do you dismiss them by groups to line up? Or do you just say it's time for recess and they go? Do they have to hand you some kind of an assignment before they can go? These are all things that you want to reflect on and ask yourself, did you have more moments of chaos during transitions, or did it work out pretty well for you? And finally, electronic device usage, such as cell phones and tablets. Now, in some schools, the electronics, such as tablets or Chromebooks or netbooks, are provided to the students, and maybe you have some kind of a system where students are supposed to take it out right away and have them face down or closed, or maybe they're not allowed to take it out at all when they get to class until you instruct them to. In some schools, it's a bring your own device. So are they allowed to take out their cell phones while they're waiting, or do they have to keep them in their backpack until you give them instruction? The same goes for if you have some sort of computer lab set up in your classroom in the back. How do students know when it's okay for them to use the computers? Is there a sign-in sheet? Do they have to just come and ask you? Is it just an unspoken understanding that when they need to use the computers, they're allowed to go back there? These are all things that you need to consider in your classroom so that students aren't using electronics inappropriately or when they're not supposed to. So we covered a lot today, and I'm hoping that I gave you a lot to think about in terms of your procedures for next year. I know that, again, it's a lot to think about because it's the end of the year, but honestly, this is the best time for you to reflect on what you did last year. And if you didn't get a chance to download that resource yet, go ahead and head on over to teachersneedteachers.com/5, and you'll see the link to that. Also, if you didn't get a chance to listen to the other episodes, go ahead and head on over to teachersneedteachers.com/podcast, and you'll see all of the previous episodes. It's really important that you take the time to reflect on your classroom setup as well as your grading policies. So I'm so appreciative that you've been listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. If you like the show and want to check out more, you can go to teachersneedteachers.com/5. And, if you want to discuss or ask any questions about anything in this episode, you can also head on over to my Facebook group. You can search Teachers Need Teachers in Facebook, or you can go to teachersneedteachers.com/FB, which is all in lowercase. And I would love if you could go over to your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Stitcher, and leave a rating and a review. This not only helps me know how I can improve the podcast, but it honestly makes it so that other teachers who benefit from this podcast will be able to find it. And if you have any questions or suggestions, or you want to be a guest on the show, please email me at kim@teachersneedteachers.com. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.